In today's session, I will give you a brief introduction under the context of this training cycle before yielding the floor to Jorge Mansilla, who is today's speaker. Let me remind you and first welcome everyone, those who have joined for this penultimate session of this training session, focusing to the DDCC under the umbrella and the context of the initiative of convergency that we're working with PAHO, WHO, IDB, and just to remind you that we're following a technical pathway, a route, which is focused on a pyramid, which is based on the IPS, the International Patient Summary, IPS, and how do we get subproducts associated to vaccination certificates, DDCC, which is part of this IPS. And the patient summary, the training cycles that we are conducting throughout this month have to do with the half of this pyramid, all that which has to do with the vaccination certificate. And we are at the penultimate session, last but one session, which is focusing on the records of the reliance framework for the DDCC that we will be dealing with this week. And next week, we hope to finish with a process for the generation of certificates. Once we're done with these two last training sessions in the framework of the DDCC, we will move on toward the end of April or beginning of May, perhaps, to workshops focused on IPS, preferably. After this DDCC cycle, we will go back to the base of the pyramid and we'll deal with all transformations in order to move from one level to the next. The idea is that we will close during these two successive weeks all knowledge that has to do with the vaccination certificate. And as you acknowledge, we're working together with those who participate in IPS, focusing first of all in the structure of the IPS, understanding it well, to have a patient summary from that base and focusing on certain transformations that are conducive to the vaccination certificates, DDCC, then how these are generated, and the transit from the pyramid's base to the top will be seamless. So Jorge Mansilla, who will be today's presenter, now has the floor. Go ahead, Jorge. Thank you. Thank you so very much. Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you. I hope that you can see on the screen my presentation. Yes, we can see it now. Jorge, thank you. Okay, very well then. I'm Jorge Mansilla, SAS engineer, sense engineer. We have been dealing with implementation. We work with several spaces, and I'm an advisor to PAHO and a consultant that works as a member of the Chile chapter, developing standards for Chile. And what we will be considering today in this seminar for the generation of the OPS-DDCC racial LACPASS, which is a transaction, the so-called generation bundle, which is connected to and related to several other seminars where we have been discussing the data sets, the transactions, how these actually take place. And today I will be showing you so that you will have the knowledge and minimum knowledge to generate the bundle that has to do with this records, which is the one that will be generated. Once you complete the questionnaire, it is processed and it goes into a bundle, which is sort of a folder, like a folder that has information inside it. And each one of the elements within it are the ones that make up this information. And thus you create the um, bundle and the implementation guide, which is part of the DDCC. Here you have the access to the project that I will be discussing. We'll move on to the guide, and I will tell you what we're going to be looking at today. As I was saying, I've discussed also the objective, the purpose, then we'll move into the context of the actual transaction. This happened in previous sessions, but it is always good to recall what we said earlier. And then we will move to the entrance or entry bundle, which is not a long presentation, by the way. It explains everything which is necessary in order to generate the so-called bundle. And then we see how it can be validated, how it can be reviewed, and to make certain that we have prepared it correctly. So here what you can see now up front is the transaction called Submit Health Event, SHE. This is a process to send a health event with two actors. Which are these two actors? The digital solution, on the one hand, which sends all the data. What is all the data? It is a questionnaire, including all the information, the minimum data in order to be able to generate a certificate. This is something we discussed in an earlier presentation. Then we move on to the transactions and the service of generation. Then this is sent so that the other actor, DDCC generator service, will give us back a response regarding this transaction, and thus we can generate a certificate. The idea here in under is that we will have digital certificates. This is what we need as regards the field of health. But there are some people who do not have the technological means in order to do this type of work. They don't have knowledge in this regard. There are some locations, regions, places that have no access to this technology. Therefore, we just work with the digital certificate, and we try to cut the pathway. These certificates are available in paper, also in a digital fashion for those who do not have an interactive connection or internet, and also we can consult this online. So here we have the context for this transaction for the Submit Health event that you can see right here in this URL. You can see the profile with different entry points, which enables us. It's a bundle, let us say, that has two entry points, the questionnaire, and here you have the building of the actual message with both variables, the bundle event and the parameters, and thus we can generate this with a question response or follow the parameters line and thus elaborate the questionnaire response. In order, for the sake of simplicity and simplifying all this type of work, we will use this questionnaire response as part of the bundle. Generally speaking, I am showing you now the general structure of a bundle resource, a general resource that gives us the FHIRE resource. This type of resource called FHIRE is a container for resources. We could say that it is a filer, and each one of the papers I put in it, each one of the documents would be a contained resource in that bank. That is the simplest definition we can give to this bundle. There are some compulsory elements which are mandatory and some others which are not mandatory in the bundle. We always have to take care of the mandatory. One is the type of bundle, whether it is a document, a message, or a batch. In this case, it is fixed. It's fixed. In our case, we use a fixed type. And further down, we have the entries. You can see that they can be one to several. So we can include no entry at all. And the entries, I remind you, are the documents that we're going to be reviewing in order to have a bundle. And the asterisk means that there could be many of these, as many as we wish, in order to be able to have information regarding a patient's resource, a resource of an organization, a medical encounter, and so on. And further down, the reference is made to the resource. And down here, we create the idea of whether we want to conduct a consultation or not, what we want to check in, and so on. Okay, so we're going to be reviewing this so that you may see it right here on the screen. So these are the documents that we had. In the previous versions that we had discussed, we were basing ourselves on this document, but now we have a broader approach. So here you can see the structure of the resource for this specific project, with a profile or a bundle for this particular project, where on the first line, we have the type of resource we're dealing with. In other words, a bundle. Then we have an ID. This identification refers to the identification of this very resource with a number. With that number, I can search it. I can look for it. Then we have the line 428, which is the metadata of the resource. What is most important in this case is that here in this objective, what we want to include in this goal is the actual profile of this bundle. In other words, the profile which was generated from a bundle, from a standard bundle, that is, we elaborated an ad hoc bundle for this specific project. It has certain specific restrictions to it, which are specific for the case of this project. So we're saying that whenever we generate a bundle, you must review it against this profile when this specific bundle was generated. Then we have the actual type. In this case, it would be a batch, what we call it, a batch. There are different types of bundles. But in this case, it is the so-called batch type. Our lines from 10 to 17 later on include the actual entries that we will be sending out. We have an entry which is a resource, the questionnaire. Here you show the type of resource that we're going to be sending, and underneath it we have the resource. What are we going to do with this resource? Do we want to have it in the server? Do we want to obtain it? In this case, what we want to do is to create this resource with a post in the server. So that would be then the basic structure of this bundle that we're going to be generating. Let me tell you further that if you have any doubts or any comments or there's something you don't understand, I'd rather have you open the mic and ask your questions to resolve any misgivings immediately so that you are not lost and we'll get to the end and you can say that you didn't understand the word. So please interrupt me if you think that you have questions. So we have the general structure of a given resource by using a so-called bundle. And here you see the generic, specific structure of a bundle for this type of a profile. If we punch here, then you see the name, and you can move on to the implementation guide of the DDCC project, where you can also see the bundle right here, as well as the different type of data and resources that we have to fill it in.
And as I shown you in the prior slide, we can fill it out in different ways from here, from parameters, and then we open this resource here, and then it will take us to the parameters, and then we have the parameters resource, and then it'll take us to the DDCC questionnaire. Whereas if we use this one, the questionnaire, we can use either one of those two. So if we decide to use this one, a questionnaire response, and so we can go directly to our DDCC questionnaire, and we can save a step by going directly through that route. As we had shown you here, we have the entry bundle. We can reference the questionnaire in two ways. We begin with the entry a bundle with parameters, or with a questionnaire response, which is more direct, as I showed you. Then we see that the questionnaire response corresponds to the structured set of questions and answers, which are based on the minimum set of data which was distributed, and based on that a questionnaire was generated, and this is the questionnaire you have to fill out, which is sent out and then leads to the certificate being able to be generated. So these questions are grouped in groups and subgroups. All answers from the questions, from the questionnaires, have the response. And so there is a minimum set of data, and we're going to show it here on the site. So the structure of the questionnaire response, I'm going to copy here the URL of this document. This is a public document, so I'm going to paste it here in the chat so that you can access it. You can follow here, but you can have it there and you can go over it on your own later on. So here, this is the questionnaire response, DDCC questionnaire response. We have it follows a consistent pattern and the structure. And we see then the questionnaire response structure. We see the questionnaire response, and that's the resource type. So that's the resource types that we are working on right now. And it is the questionnaire response. We have the ID, then we have the meta, which is the goal, and then profile. It is this URL, and this profile has already been structured, modified, and adapted for this case. So it will be validated specifically with the data restrictions, with all the parameters that I have. And what we have to do next is add another line, which is questionnaire. Questionnaire is the form. For example, if they give us a blank sheet, but it has all the spaces for a form, name, everything is blank, and that's the structure of our questionnaire. So we say, well, this questionnaire corresponds with this questionnaire, and what we're sending here are the structured responses according to that questionnaire. And this is what needs to be validated. I don't know if you understand the rationale, the logic for this. And then we have the status of the resource, of this resource. And we can say it has been completed and the date in which this response was captured. And here we have the items, or in other words, the specific responses or answers. So we have item. The first thing is name, in this case, the name of the patient. And so we go to answer, and then we have the value strings, and we can have several value strings. We can have codes and dates, etc. In this case, we have a name, which is the patient's name in this case. All right. All right. I don't know if you have any doubts so far or questions. And we can answer any questions. But if there are no doubts or questions, we've already seen, and to recap a little bit, we saw the transactions, what they're used for, what they're good for. We have seen the minimum data sets that are needed for the questionnaire response. And now that we have generated the questionnaire response, you have the standard for certain operations. So, given that the standard provides certain operations, among them there is validation, for example, validation for a resource. So we can validate against the standard, and we can also validate against the profiles that we have been created for each use case that we generate specifically. So for this project, we had a server where we uploaded or the profiles associated to this project. So we generated a questionnaire response, a bundle with all the answers for the questionnaire response, and then we will have the option to go validate this resource against the more specific standard, or in other words, the profile we generated, to see how it is doing. And for this, we need to occupy the validate. We have to use the validations of the method. There is, so for this, we have the happy server. And here we see, so in this in this page here, you're going to find, or in this guide, you're going to find the validate operation. So how can we validate a resource? So we have this URL. Oh, there's a mistake here. Oh, it's DCC. DDCC. It's a HTTPS DDCC FHIR CENSCL. So we have several resources that have been uploaded, and this is what we have used for this project. And so we are going to be able through this to do the validations that I need. In this case, what is it that we want to validate? We want to validate this resource, which is a bundle. And so then this is a resource type, which is called a bundle. It has several internal types, like it is a batch. Like, for example, in the cooking shows, we have a recipe, and I have my recipe ready for this, and it's shown here. And so what I'm going to validate is this resource that we are seeing here, which is also ready to be downloaded. So what am I gonna use for this? I will use a tool which will allow me to send a resource and be able to validate it. And we're validated it against this server HTTPS DDCC FHIR sends CL FHIR bundle validate. So this means that we are validating a bundle resource. And so that's how we do it. That's how we validate the bundle type resources. So those of you who have this resource, we see that the first thing you have is a questionnaire response, and it contains several answers according to the minimum data set with all the ID, name, sex, and everything that relates to the questionnaire. We have seen this before in the prior session. So what do we want to do with this? We are going to validate it. So the method is through a post, and so that's how we validate it. So if I do this operation here, if you give me a second here, all right, here we go. Here I am. So
Entonces aquí lo validé, me había equivocado.
here I have validated it. It's already validated. So I have a result here, which tells me, oh, you have an information alert. You cannot validate an option which is not delivered. And we see this option 83. It's giving us an error message. And this is because we're trying to validate the brand against a system. And this system is not validating this address. That code is not validated. So it's telling me that it is an error.
Un problema, pero information más que
It's telling me that it is a problem. More than an error, it's a functional situation.
vamos a ver el otro.
And let us see the other one in line 94. We have a similar situation.
Acá tenemos
Here, we had another error here. And so I'm putting it in lowercase. And it's uppercase.
Aquí me tuvo un error.
Okay, there's an error there. I apologize that this hadn't happened.
Pero lo podemos ir a revisar de una manera.
Okay, let me go review it and see what's going on, and we can do this very quickly.
Pido disculpas. Pero vamos a ir a revisarlo. Tratar de solucionarlo de manera muy
Oh, okay, I apologize. Let me go quickly here.
Pues acá teníamos un error en el manufacturer. Vamos a ir a
Okay,
ver.
so we go here to manufacturer.
Choice.
Vaccine manufacturer. I guess it was misspelled somewhere. That was the problem. Okay.
Ya, ahí tenéis que revisarlo, no voy a quiero tener tiempo con esto, lo voy a revisar y se lo voy a enviar el correo.
Okay, I'm going to review it and so that we don't waste any more time here. But these are errors that are not serious. They are informational messages or alerts. But here, for example, so I'm going to correct it and I'll send it to you. But here we can see all the elements that need to be uploaded and need to be sent. So here we see the structure. Here we go here by name. That's what is highlighted. And here we see link ID name. And so that is that field, that element. So when I'm sending name, so we have to say it's link ID name. And we can make a mistake if we use that first capital letter. It will tell me that name does not exist. And we can then make sure that we're validating against the profile that we instructed the program to do up here. So this is the profile against which we are validating. We generated a profile, and that's what we're validating against. So we're validating against name. If, for example, in birthday, this is the format that is admitted to store birth and any date, either a birth date or whatever. First the year, then the month, and then the date. So this is a value date on a date. What happens if I give it a year that does not exist? This 19,933. So it will tell me that that year does not exist. So don't send me that date because it can't be validated. So if now I go back in and to correct it, and now I can validate it, what happens if I put 20 July 1993 using a different format? There it will stop me and say, no, that format you cannot admit, or this format cannot be admitted. And that's how we can make sure we're validating against the standard and against the profile we generated for this particular use. So here, for example, here, this is the standard. So we have a group of values that are associated with the standard. So this tells us how we can store, or excuse me, how we can save the sex of a patient. So the code tells us male, female, and other, and unknown. This is the way in which we can store or save the sex of the patient, male, female, unknown. If we wanted to adapt it to our reality, to a local reality in Chile, we would need to assign a new set of values, but we already have this. It has generated this. So what happens if I want to say masculino, the word in Spanish? So I'm writing here masculino, which is male, but it will tell me, no, in this value set that you gave me, the word masculino does not exist, but we have female or male. But now if I give female, now I can get the validation. So the patient, whether male or female, what the system does, it validates against the standard or against the profile that you have created. And here we are validating against the profile in a way.
contra nuestro perfil en sí.
So here we have the profile that we had generated earlier.
No, esos serían como
Let us look
los datos que podríamos probar.
at the data that we could put to the test
Digamos,
by validating the date.
mira, aquí podemos validar un
Here you can validate with a 0.
la dosis,
We send the dosage,
primera dosis, segunda dosis, tercera dosis.
first dosage, second dosage, third dosage. I put my name here, Jorge. Validates it says careful, because this has to be wholes. It cannot be fragments or fractions to make it valid. I can put any whole value and it will validate it.
Entonces ahí me lo va a validar.
It will validate it immediately.
Entonces, con eso podemos
So,
validar
by doing this, we can show how the resource was actually generated, how a bundle was generated, how the bundle contained the questionnaire response within it, in order to thus go ahead and get the certificate. And this is what I could explain to you today. I don't know if you have any comments or questions that you may wish to ask.
algo que no hayan entendido.
Is there anything you didn't understand or any additional information you would like for me to send you?
O si les quedó todo claro, o muy poco
Or
claro.
whether everything is clear or maybe not that clear?
Si no estaríamos, Carlos,
Let me know. Otherwise, do you have any questions?
Carlos Núñez, no lo veo tampoco.
I don't see any questions.
Está ahí escondido.
Very good, Jorge.
No, sino que
Wonderful.
solo
If there are no doubts, just to remind you
that
that all the materials of this training cycle are recorded. They're in the YouTube Raxel channel. Now we are defaced because of with last week and this week, but now we are updating it, including last week's report. If you don't have any doubts or questions, we will meet again next week for the last training session within this cycle. We hope that we'll be able to generate a certificate to then be able to start with the IPS workshops. Thank you so very much, Jorge, for this session today. And we will meet again next week. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to all the attendees. Thank you. I have a question. Someone is saying I have a question. These materials, can you send it to us? All that has been already broadcast, because the previous meeting was the first one for me, and I would like to see all the information to be updated. Yes, let me review this once again. In this site that I'm trying to show you now, this is the Raxel site under resources, which I can show you. You can go in, you can have access as a guest. You don't have to have a password, and this guest access allows you to go to all the cycles and sessions under this framework. This is the second version of this cycle, because this was already done at the end of last year. If you go into any of these cycles, you will find the presentations and the material with the description. All of them are second version. Second version is what we have been doing between March and April of this year. But there we have all the materials as well as the recordings, which are here available to you. Each one of these recording on a YouTube channel that of LACPASS. So you can access from the here or from the channel, YouTube channel, where you have access to all this information, which is there available to you. This is the second cycle, right? Yes, second version or second cycle. Yes, we're lagging behind with the uploading. We still need the one on transactions, which was last week's session, as well as the generation, which we have to bring in also what we have seen today. But this is indeed the second cycle, because the third cycle perhaps will not repeat it as such. If you can access, the third cycle has to do with terminology, basically. I will include that once we start with the IPS workshops in LACPASS, because we'll be using the terminology to see these transformations. Excellent, wonderful. That is excellent. So here you can navigate and review all the information. Wonderful. I will be awaiting this information and all the details. Thank you so very much. Okay, so if you don't have any other questions, we can now say goodbye. Thank you very much to all of you, the attendees, and we will see you next week. May you have a good weekend. Wonderful weekend to all.